Hey, what's up guys? It's Clayton with Fly with Clayton, and today we're going to be doing another CFI lesson, and we're going to be talking about runway incursion. So stick around, let's find out more. Alright guys, well welcome back. Today, as I said, we're going to be talking about runway incursion, such an important subject that I think we as pilots need to know and understand. I mean, just recently in the news regarding an American Airlines flight and a Delta flight at JFK almost colliding on the runway, and even also in Austin, Texas with a FedEx flight almost landing on top of, what was it, a Southwest flight? So obviously a very, very important topic to talk about and a very important topic to be aware of. So without further ado, let's just jump right into it. So first thing we need to understand is what exactly is a runway incursion. Just plain and simply put, a runway incursion is whenever there's a plane or an object or something on the runway that's not supposed to be there or hasn't been cleared to be there. So whether you taxi out onto a runway without clearance, maybe you're at some fancy private airport down in Florida and some person in a golf cart just skirts right across the runway while you're on approach to land. Both of those would be categorized as runway incursions. So let's just talk about what are some ways and some different scenarios that would lead to runway incursions and how we can kind of mitigate them. So first thing we want to talk about is just taxiing challenges. We want to maintain situational awareness while we're taxiing. If you're taxiing out to a runway, you want to make sure if you're at a towered airport, if you're going to taxi across a runway, or if you're getting ready to take off, we get clearance before we cross a hold short line. Now, I don't have a picture of it with me, but I'm going to put it on the screen right here of what a hold short line looks like. The way I like to think of a hold short line is I kind of relate it to driving. If you're driving down a 2-lane road and you have a solid yellow line in the middle of the road, we're taught that you can't pass over that. You cannot go over that line. So think of it this way in flying. If you see the solid line, you can't cross it without clearance. So think before you cross that line. Now in driving, if we're driving down the road and we see a dashed line, we know we can pass there. So in aviation, on a hold short line, we can freely cross over that dashed line. If you're on the side of the dashed line, you can cross over that line, no issue. Especially if you've just landed, you want to make sure you get right off the runway. You don't want to be sitting there on the runway. And a little caveat there to know with a hold short line, if you do land, make sure you completely cross the hold short line once you vacate the runway. So maintain situational awareness. If there's a hold short line, make sure we're holding short of that if we don't have clearance. And if you're at a non-towered airport or an uncontrolled airfield, make sure before you cross that line, you are unsure that the runway is clear, there's no plane on final, just ensuring that situational awareness of you being aware of what's going on. Excuse me, I got something in my throat. So distractions, this is a big one. Also, while we're taxiing, you want to make sure the big way we can do this is just prep ahead of time. Shouldn't be fiddling with the radio or trying to write down weather or something like that while you're taxiing. Make sure everything's done ahead of time. And simply put, the best way to prevent these distractions is to do your checklist. Do your pre-taxi checklist beforehand. Get everything set so that way when you're taxiing, you can be fully focused on making sure you're not crossing hold short lines, not colliding with other aircraft, and you're just fully focused on what you're doing. So don't be talking while you're doing this. We have something called sterile cockpit. We can maintain that sterile cockpit of not having any unnecessary conversation that doesn't pertain to the flight during taxi, takeoff, and even climb out. So just maintaining a sterile cockpit and not having unnecessary conversations. Put your phone away. Don't be texting or anything like that while you're taxiing out. Really just putting all us distractions aside that distract us while we're taxiing. So that kind of leads into the next area. It's just having appropriate cockpit activities. While you can have a lot of things going on while you're in the plane. There can be a heavy workload, whether you're trying to plug in stuff into your GPS or just anything that could distract you. Having that workload simplified and having it done ahead of time so it's not distracting you. And we talked about a sterile cockpit, why it's important to have that sterile cockpit to prevent any distractions. Another big thing that helps you with this is to have a current copy of the airport diagram. You don't want to be looking around, unsure of where there's hold short lines or anything like that. have a diagram and know exactly where you're going. Know there's a runway coming up, so you're more than likely going to either need to hold short or have you already been cleared to cross. Just being situationally aware of what's going on, where you're at, and stuff like that. Big thing, write down your taxi clearance and your taxi instructions. If you have them wrote down, you're not going to forget them. You can look down and reference them, say, all right, I know I need to hold short of runway 1028, and I have not been cleared to cross. So you don't run the risk of accidentally crossing the runway 1028. Just being simply just writing down so you can reference that stuff and you don't forget it. So those are some good ways to have some appropriate cockpit activity. Another thing to consider is if you're maybe at an airport you're unfamiliar with, we can request something called progressive taxi. And that's essentially where the controller tells you step by step where you need to go and where you need to turn. Be aware you may not always be able to get this. Maybe your controller's super busy. And we should also just demonstrate our own initiative to study diagrams and be able to figure out where we are. But that is a nice little safety barrier to kind of have and some help from ATC. Briefing. This is a big thing. It's just before you even start taxiing, like I said, study the charts and plan out what you're expecting, where you're going to go. And a big thing with that is just encouraging others who are in your plane, who are riding with you, any passengers or anything. If they see something maybe you missed or something that just looks out of the ordinary, tell them to speak up. You might have missed something, and it's always great to have an extra set of eyes to kind of be on the lookout for you. It might be nothing, but better safe than sorry. Taxiing near other aircraft, you want to make sure that you're taxiing where you're supposed to. And also a great thing about this is just listening on the frequency. If you can be situationally aware of what other aircraft have been cleared to do, you might catch a slip up. Controllers aren't perfect. Other pilots aren't perfect. So if you can maintain that situational awareness, you could possibly catch a little slip up. Maybe a mistake that the controller made, or maybe they cleared you both to cross or cleared you to cross a runway while someone else was cleared to take off. Just maintaining that situational awareness, that kind of be that second barrier of defense in case something slips by a controller or yourself. That's the big thing, is just maintaining that situational awareness. So let's talk about some things you can do in terms of steering, maneuvering, maintaining taxiway, runway position, and also just situational awareness. We're going to be hitting on situational awareness a lot during this lesson. So steering, big thing is if you're taxiing, maintain that center line. If you're maintaining the center line, you're more than likely not going to collide with anything. Your wings aren't going to be clipping stuff. Unless you're an A380 pilot, hopefully that's not of concern to you. But just maintaining that center line. And we talked about don't fiddle with the radio. Aviate, navigate, communicate. We want to aviate even if we're not necessarily flying, traveling on the ground and being situationally aware of where we're at and not swerving all over the lines, maintaining that center line and just being precise about that. And again, we talked about having a current airport diagrams are very important. Just kind of keep a mental note of where you are, verify where you are. Know that, say I'm taxiing here at Gulf Mike Uniform, if I'm taxiing from the south ramp up to runway 19, a common taxi instruction we are given is taxi to 19 via Gulf, cross runway 1028 and join Alpha to the end. Now, a good thing for me to do is I understand, first of all, looking at this chart, there's a hot spot right there that I'm going to be flying or cruising right through when I'm taxiing. Understand that is a hot spot, and that's more than likely going to be an issue for me in terms of possibility of collision or any type of incident. So being extra vigilant in that area. But also as I'm just taxiing, referencing things as I pass them. All right, I just crossed 1028. There's the sign. I know where I'm at. All right, here's Alpha 5. I'm trying to remember this by memory. I don't have the chart with me, so if I'm wrong, forgive me. But just referencing your signs and where you are on the airfield to your airport diagram helps you maintain that extra level of situational awareness. And we talked about using all your available resources. This is a great thing. Technology has gotten tremendous for us nowadays. There's this great tool called ForeFlight and ADS-B in and out. ADS-B in allows us to see other traffic, and sometimes it even helps while taxiing. Understand there's a plane there, or maybe even seeing on the ADS-B that a plane's coming on approach right before we're about to taxi out onto the runway. Just utilizing all your tools at your disposal to maintain that vigilance and prevent those runway incursions. brief your taxi routes ahead of time. Don't fall to the symptom of just anticipation and only narrowing on what you expect, but also briefing ahead of time what you could expect and be prepared for anything ATC might correct or change you on there as well. And of course, we've all heard this as pilots, stay two steps ahead of the airplane. Make sure you're on top of things 2 steps ahead and you're not struggling to catch up, and maintain that situational awareness. We're going to keep coming back to that. So we talked about hold short lines, and I threw a picture up on the screen. If I remember to put one back up here, I'll put one. But the big thing is, if it's a solid line, don't cross without a clearance. And if it's a dashed line, you are good to just cross right across whenever you need to. So let's talk about your landing and rollout. If you come into land and you've just landed on the runway, of course, you are very, very much clear to cross over the dash line to get off the runway. But some other things to consider is if there's parallel runways or an intersecting runway. We want to make sure if we're told to land and hold short, which if you're a student pilot, you're not going to be having to worry about that. But land and hold short operations, make sure we're not crossing onto a runway we weren't cleared to and one we were told to hold short of. If we taxi off on parallel runways and we taxi off a runway, make sure we don't accidentally cross right onto the other runway. They might be landing or taking off on that runway as well. So paying attention to those hold short lines and ensuring that you are cleared to cross them if you need to. And when in doubt, always feel free to ask ATC again, ATC, am I cleared to cross? Just to verify. There's nothing wrong with having that second level of check just to verify and just be safe. So we kind of talked a little bit about controlled and uncontrolled airports. Let's just dive a little bit more in depth with those. With controlled airports, obviously we're going to have a control tower, and a very easy way we can just kind of avoid some confusion and possibility of misunderstanding is just using common ATC phraseology. We shouldn't be, using incorrect lingo. We should be talking professionally and using the phraseology that FAA has laid out for us. We don't want to have any confusion, and when we use this standardized phraseology, it makes things more clear and easier to understand. A big thing also to understand about controlled airports is they're going to choose the controlled runway. ATC chooses the active runway, so you don't have to worry about what's quote-unquote active and not, but of course we still want to maintain that vigilance of what runway we're cleared to cross and not cross. Eliminate expectation bias. I kind of mentioned this and I want to talk a little more about this. There's nothing wrong with anticipating what ATC might have, but we don't want to focus in on it where we just ignore what they actually tell us. Like at Greenville downtown, I'm familiar and I have a good feeling of what they're going to tell me for taxi clearance, but I never want to just assume that's what they're going to tell me because it could be different. You don't want to assume they tell you one thing, focus out and miss what they actually tell you, and then end up doing the wrong thing. That can be very catastrophic. So eliminate that expectation bias. And then let's talk about uncontrolled airports. A thing to know with uncontrolled versus controlled, we talked about active runways. As an uncontrolled airport, assume all runways are active. You could have an airport where a student's working in the pattern on runway 5 and you got a jet coming on final on runway 23. It's bound to happen and it can happen. So maintaining that situational awareness is obviously a very big part of that. But also just being familiar with your airport's local traffic pattern and pattern altitude. You want to make sure if you're flying at the correct pattern altitude, you don't want to be accidentally descending on top of another plane or descending or climbing up into another plane. Remember, uncontrolled fields, there's a strong possibility that planes could be using this field and not be using radios. They're not required. So just being extra vigilant in that sense. In flight operations may be coming from either end of the runway. The wind could be calm and it's kind of a toss-up which runway is in use. So a little pro tip I like to do is, of course, if you're coming in to land at an uncontrolled field, listen in on the frequency and listen if you hear anyone using a specific runway. Be courteous. I know you're technically allowed to use whichever runway, but no one likes that one guy who's coming to land runway 23 when there's 4 people in the pattern on runway 4 or runway 5. Don't be that guy. Okay, and we talked about, speaking of CTAF, just communicate your intentions very clearly and using proper phraseology on the CTAF so that pilots understand your intentions and can also maintain that situational awareness. And like I said, not all aircraft are radio equipped, so assume there are possibility of planes not listening or communicating what they're doing. So be sure to scan very effectively on uncontrolled fields, up the approach in, down the runway, ensure before you taxi out into a runway there's no one out there and there's no one on final. That's one of my big things. Before I even turn out onto the runway, I am looking down final and ensuring that there is no one coming down final about to land on me. So let's talk about night operations. Obviously, it's one thing to do, maintain that situational awareness during the day when you can see things, but night, it's a different story. It's very dark out, and there's not exactly a lot of light. But in some respect, it actually is a little easier to see things at night, thanks to the help of lights. So, of course, big things we want to know is the use of lights on our aircraft during the night, just to help be visible. So, big thing is if your engine is running, have that beacon running, making sure that planes can see that your engine is running, because it might be dark. They might not be able to tell that your engine is running. So if your engine is on, have your beacon on. Of course, if you're taxiing, turn on your nav lights or even your taxiway lights. It just helps you become more visible and helps other pilots be able to see you. And of course, also with the navigation lights, with the green on the right, the red on the left, and then also the white light, it helps pilots get a sense of the direction you're coming from, even if they can't see the body of your aircraft. So it's very important to have those nav lights on. Really just make yourself more visible. If you're going to be crossing runways, it's the same thing at night. Making your plane more visible, turn on lights, and just being extra vigilant to look out for other aircraft that possibly could be coming, not making radio calls or anything like that. So just scanning the runway, looking for lights and stuff like that. Making sure I'm not missing anything here. Reduced visibility makes taxiing more difficult, so be sure to turn on those airport lights if you need to. Make sure they're up and visible so you can see the taxiway. And of course, this goes back during the daytime operations, but follow the center line. Some airports even have the taxiway center lights. Make sure you're staying right on that center line to avoid accidentally going off the taxiway and maybe even going into the grass or something like that. And then, of course, some airports also have hold short lights where they light up the hold short lines. So just be extra vigilant to not cross those during the night and accidentally taxiing out onto an active runway or anything like that. Awesome. So I think that pretty much sums up everything when it comes to runway incursions. Like I said, it's a very important subject because it can lead to very catastrophic results if vigilance is not maintained or if you don't have a good situational awareness. So that's why it's very important as instructors we promote that in our students to help them maintain that good situational awareness and hopefully prevent them from getting caught into a situation where there is a runway incursion. So just kind of a brief little summary. We talked about some different taxiing challenges and ways you can properly taxi, following the center line and just briefing your taxi plan ahead of time, having that sterile cockpit and not having anything distract you, maintain that situational awareness, listening to other aircraft talking on frequency or other controllers so we're aware of what other planes are doing. And then also we talked about steering maneuverability and then runway position, having those airport diagrams and being up to date, monitoring your location while you're taxiing, and of course having technology like ForeFlight so we can see where other traffic is at. We talked about hold short lines, why they're so important, which sides you're allowed to cross and which sides you're not allowed to cross. So of course, maintain vigilance whenever you approach a hold short line. Make sure you have that clearance before you cross, or if it's an uncontrolled field, make sure there's no one out in the runway or no one on the final before you turn out in the runway. Talked about some differences between controlled and uncontrolled airports. We also then finally talked about landing operations, or night operations, should say, and just the importance of having your lights turned on and being extra vigilant to spot other aircraft and make yourself be as visible as possible. All right. It's kind of a little bit of a shorter lesson. I don't know. I felt like I didn't ramble that much. Maybe I did. But either way, thank you guys so much for watching. Hope you guys are enjoying these videos and hope they're helpful if some of you are kind of studying along with your CFI stuff as me. I'm feeling real confident and feeling real good teaching these stuff. So I'm very excited for my check ride. I can't wait once I get my CFI to continue helping you guys who want to train and become pilots kind of reach a higher level and continue to do so. So with that said, thank you guys so much for watching. Hope you guys have a fantastic day. I'll catch you guys in the next one, hopefully soon. Peace out.